The blood on Clara Grantham's hands had long since dried, but the memory of her father's final breath still clung to her like morning frost on winter ground as she rode into Jerome Junction, Arizona Territory, in the spring of 1878. She had traveled 300 miles from Tucson with nothing but a single horse, a worn leather satchel containing her father's last letter, and a determination that burned hotter than the desert sun. The town sprawled before her like a scar across the mountain landscape, all wooden buildings and false-fronted storefronts clinging to the steep hillsides where copper mining had drawn men from across the territories seeking fortune. Clara had no interest in copper. She sought something far more precious, the truth about who had murdered Thomas Grantham and stolen his mining claim. The main street bustled with afternoon activity. Wagons loaded with ore rumbled past, their wheels churning up dust that coated everything in a fine red powder. Men in work clothes stumbled from saloons despite the early hour, their faces weather-beaten and eyes hollow from the backbreaking labor underground. Clara guided her mare toward the sheriff's office, her green eyes scanning every face, searching for recognition or guilt. Sheriff Dawson proved to be a portly man with tobacco-stained whiskers and an air of practiced indifference. He barely looked up from his desk when Clara entered, and when she explained her purpose, his expression shifted from disinterest to outright dismissal. "Miss Grantham, your father's death was ruled an accident. Man got drunk, fell down a mine shaft. Happens more than you'd think around here." "My father never touched whiskey," Clara said, keeping her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "And he wrote to me 2 days before he died, saying someone was trying to force him off his claim. He named 3 men, Wade Sullivan, Frank Morrison, and a man they call the Colonel." Dawson finally met her eyes, and what she saw there confirmed her worst suspicions: fear. The sheriff was afraid. Those are serious accusations against respected businessmen. The Colonel especially. You got any proof beyond a letter written by a man who might have been losing his faculties? My father was 42 years old and sharp as they come. If you will not investigate, I will find someone who will. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight. "There is nobody in this town who will cross the Colonel. My advice: take whatever your father left you and go back to wherever you came from. Jerome Junction is no place for a woman alone." Clara had expected as much. She turned without another word and stepped back into the harsh sunlight, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. The town suddenly felt more hostile, every glance from passing miners loaded with potential threat. She needed help, but where could she find someone willing to stand against powerful men in a place where the law had been bought and paid for? The answer came from an unexpected source. As Clara led her horse toward the livery stable, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes approached her. "I could not help but overhear your conversation with the sheriff," the woman said quietly. "My name is Margaret Walsh. I run the boarding house on the north end of town. Your father stayed with me when he first arrived in Jerome Junction." "Did you know him well?" Clara asked, hope flickering in her chest. "Well enough to know he was a good man who did not drink and did not deserve what happened to him. I also know the sheriff is right about one thing. Nobody in this town will help you." Margaret paused, glancing around to ensure they were not being overheard. "But there is a man who lives up in the mountains, Nathan Jennings. He does not come to town often, maybe once every few months for supplies. But when he does, even the Colonel's men give him space. Mountain man, trapper, keeps to himself mostly. If anyone could help you get justice, it might be him." "Where would I find him?" "He has a cabin up near Mingus Mountain, maybe 10 miles northeast of here. Follow the creek that runs past the old Spanish mission ruins. His place is well hidden, But if you are persistent and he decides to let you find him, you might have a chance. I warn you, though, Nathan Jennings is not what you would call sociable. He left civilization behind for reasons of his own, and he does not take kindly to being disturbed. Clara felt her determination solidify into something harder than iron. I have ridden 300 miles. I can manage 10 more. Thank you, Mrs. Walsh. Wait. Margaret pressed a small cloth bundle into Clara's hands. Food for the journey, and Miss Grantham. Your father spoke of you often. He was very proud. I am sorry for your loss. The words, simple and sincere, nearly broke through Clara's carefully maintained composure. She blinked back tears and nodded her thanks before mounting her horse and turning toward the mountains. The ride took longer than Clara anticipated. The terrain grew rougher with each mile, the path little more than a game trail winding through juniper and pinyon pine. The creek Margaret had mentioned tumbled down from higher elevations, its water cold and clear. Clara followed it as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She almost missed the cabin entirely. It sat nestled against a cliff face, constructed from local stone and weathered timber that blended so perfectly with the surroundings that only the thin stream of smoke rising from its chimney gave away its presence. Clara dismounted a respectful distance away, suddenly uncertain. What if this mountain man refused to see her? What if he turned out to be as corrupt as the men in town? Before she could call out, a voice emerged from the shadows to her left. You are either lost or looking for me. Either way, you are trespassing. Clara spun around, her hand instinctively moving to the small pistol she carried in her belt. A man stepped into view, and despite her situation, Clara found herself momentarily speechless. Nathan Jennings stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who lived by physical labor. His dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling blue that seemed to see right through her defenses. He carried a rifle with casual ease, though it was not currently pointed at her. I am looking for you, Mr. Jennings. My name is Clara Grantham. I need your help. I do not help people. That is why I live up here. His voice was deep and rough from lack of use, but not unkind. Turn around and head back before it gets dark. These mountains are dangerous for those who do not know them. My father was murdered, Clara said quickly, before he could disappear back into the forest. The sheriff will not investigate because the men responsible have money and power. I was told you are the only person who might be willing to stand against them. Nathan's expression did not change, but something flickered in those blue eyes. Who told you that, Margaret Walsh? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made Clara's skin prickle. Finally, he sighed, a sound of resignation. You rode all the way up here alone. Yes, that was foolish. There are men who would see a woman traveling alone as an opportunity. He shifted his rifle to his other shoulder. You can tell me your story, but I am making no promises. Follow me. Your horse needs water. Clara led her mare behind Nathan as he walked toward the cabin. Up close, she could see that while simple, his home was well maintained. A small corral held 2 horses and a mule. A vegetable garden grew in a sunny spot nearby, and animal pelts hung stretched and drying from a wooden frame. This was not the dwelling of a man who had given up on life, but rather someone who had chosen a different way of living. Nathan took her horse's reins and led the animal to a trough fed by a diverted stream. Clara watched as he moved with efficient, practiced motions, checking the mare's hooves and running a hand along her flanks. You took decent care of her on the journey, he observed. That speaks well of you. My father taught me to respect animals. They give us their service and trust. The least we can do is treat them properly." Nathan glanced at her, something like approval in his eyes. "Come inside. You might as well sit while you tell me why you think a man who left the world behind should dive back into it for a stranger." The interior of the cabin surprised Clara. She had expected rough and chaotic, but instead found a space that was sparse yet comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a pot hanging over low flames that smelled of cooking venison. Books lined a shelf near the single window, their spines worn with reading. A bed stood in one corner, neatly made, and a handmade table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Nathan gestured for her to sit and ladled stew into a wooden bowl without asking if she was hungry. He set it before her along with a chunk of bread, then sat across the table with his own meal. "Talk," he said simply, so Clara did. She told him about her father, a widower who had raised her alone after her mother died of cholera when Clara was 8. She explained how Thomas Grantham had worked as a surveyor and cartographer, skilled in reading the land and finding valuable mineral deposits. How he had come to Jerome Junction 6 months ago after a company hired him to survey potential mining sites. How he had staked his own claim on a promising piece of land and written to Clara with excitement about finally striking it rich after years of modest living. Then the letters had changed in tone. Her father mentioned men pressuring him to sell, offers that grew increasingly aggressive. Veiled threats. Finally, his last letter, dated March 15th, naming Wade Sullivan, Frank Morrison, and the colonel as men he feared would not take no for an answer. On March 17th, a telegram arrived informing Clara that her father had died in a mining accident. By the time she settled affairs in Tucson and made the journey to Jerome Junction, Thomas Grantham had already been buried, his claim transferred to something called the Territorial Development Company, and all his personal effects had mysteriously disappeared. "I am not a naive woman, Mr. Jennings," Clara said, her stew growing cold as she spoke. "I understand the world can be cruel and unjust, but I cannot let my father's death go unavenged. I cannot let those men think they can murder someone and face no consequences. Even if I have to spend every cent I have, even if it takes years, I will see justice done." Nathan had listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Now he pushed his empty bowl aside and studied her across the table. "What makes you think you can get justice? You are one woman against wealthy, connected men. Even if you proved your father was murdered, which would be nearly impossible after all this time, do you think a judge in their pocket would rule against them?" "I do not know," Clara admitted, "but I have to try. He was all the family I had. If I do nothing, if I just walk away, then his life meant nothing. I become complicit in his murder through my silence." Nathan stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening forest. The silence stretched so long that Clara thought he was about to tell her to leave. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "7 years ago, I worked for the railroad. I was a foreman on a crew laying track through Colorado territory. There was a man, a vice president of the company, who was cutting costs by using inferior materials and pocketing the difference. I discovered this and reported it through proper channels. 2 weeks later, a bridge collapsed. 15 men died, including my younger brother. The vice president had me blacklisted, said I was the one who approved the faulty materials. No one would hire me. My reputation was destroyed. The men who died, their families got nothing. The vice president retired wealthy." He turned to face her, and Clara saw the same pain in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. "I left civilization because I learned a hard truth. Justice is not something that exists on its own. It is not some natural force like gravity or rainfall. Justice only exists when people create it, when they are willing to fight for it and enforce it. In most places, the people with power write the rules and they do not write them fairly. So I came here, where the only rules are the ones I make for myself, where I do not have to watch powerful men destroy the innocent. But you still care, Clara said softly. Otherwise you would not have told me that story. You would have sent me away the moment I arrived. Nathan's jaw clenched. Caring and acting are two different things, are they? Or is that what you tell yourself to justify hiding in these mountains? Clara stood, meeting his gaze directly. I am not asking you to believe in justice as some abstract ideal. I am asking you to help me create it. Maybe you could not save your brother, but you could help me avenge my father. That has to mean something. The words hung between them, challenging and raw. For a moment, anger flashed across Nathan's face, and Clara thought she had pushed too far. Then his expression softened into something that looked almost like respect. You have courage, I will give you that. Most people do not speak to me so directly. He moved to the fireplace and stared into the flames. If I agreed to help you, and I am not saying I will, what exactly do you expect me to do? Hope surged through Clara, but she kept her voice measured. Help me find proof of what happened. You know these mountains, these territories. You said yourself that even the colonel's men give you space. You have skills and knowledge I do not possess. Together, we might be able to uncover evidence that the sheriff cannot ignore or intimidate. The sheriff is part of the problem, not the solution. Then we find another way. We go to the territorial marshal. We take it to the newspapers. We do whatever it takes. Clara moved closer, willing him to understand. I know I am asking a lot. I know you have every reason to want nothing to do with this. But Mr. Jennings, if good people do nothing because the fight seems too hard, then evil wins every single time. Nathan was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he nodded slowly. Your father's claim. Do you know the exact location? I have his surveyor's notes. They were the only things mailed back to me with his personal effects. Show me. Clara retrieved the leather satchel from where she had set it by the door. Inside, carefully preserved, were her father's notebooks filled with his neat handwriting and detailed sketches. Nathan studied them by lantern light, his finger tracing the maps and notations. I know this area, he said. Rich copper deposit, probably some silver mixed in, worth a considerable fortune if properly mined. These men killed your father for a reason. This claim could make someone wealthy for years to come. He looked up at her. The first thing we need to do is visit the site. See if there is any physical evidence left behind. Then we need to learn more about this territorial development company. Who owns it? Who profits from it? How they acquired your father's claim legally after his death. Then you will help me. Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I will help you investigate. I make no promises beyond that. If we find evidence, we can decide what to do with it. But Clara, he used her first name for the first time, and it sent an unexpected warmth through her. You need to understand the danger. These men have already killed once. They will not hesitate to do it again if they feel threatened. If we pursue this, you are putting your life at risk. I accepted that risk when I came to Jerome Junction. My life is worth nothing if I live it as a coward. Nathan studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. We start tomorrow at first light. You can sleep in the bed, I will take the floor. I cannot take your bed, Mr. Jennings. Nathan, if we are going to be working together, drop the formality. And yes, you can take the bed. I have slept on harder surfaces than my own floor. We both need rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Clara shook his hand, feeling the roughness of calluses and the strength in his grip. Thank you, Nathan. You will not regret this. "I already regret it," he said, but there was no heat in the words. "The question is whether I will survive it." That night, Clara lay in Nathan's bed, staring at the rough wooden ceiling. The sounds of the mountain surrounded her, the wind through the pines, the distant call of an owl, the occasional snap of the fire. She could hear Nathan's steady breathing from where he lay wrapped in blankets on the floor. Despite everything, despite the grief and anger and fear, Clara felt something she had not experienced since receiving news of her father's death: hope. When dawn broke, Clara woke to find Nathan already up, preparing coffee and frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. The domesticity of the scene struck her as oddly comforting. "Get dressed and eat quickly," he said. "The ride to your father's claim will take a few hours, and I want to be there and back before we risk running into anyone." They set out as the sun climbed above the eastern peaks, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Nathan led the way on his own horse, a sturdy roan gelding that moved with sure-footed confidence over the rocky terrain. He spoke little during the ride, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her of unstable ground, but otherwise remaining focused on their destination. Clara found herself watching him as they traveled. There was a sureness to Nathan's movements, a competence that came from years of living in harmony with the wild landscape. He read the land like her father had read maps, seeing things invisible to her untrained eye: animal tracks, weather signs, the subtle indicators of human passage. They reached the claim site by mid-morning. Clara recognized it from her father's detailed descriptions: a narrow canyon where exposed rock showed promising mineral veins. But what should have been an untouched mining claim showed clear signs of activity. Someone had been working the site. Nathan dismounted and walked the area slowly, examining everything. Clara followed, watching as he knelt to study the ground, touched his fingers to disturbed earth, picked up a piece of broken timber. "There was a struggle here," he said, pointing to an area where the soil was deeply scuffed. "See how the ground is torn up, and here." He moved to a large rock outcropping, blood faded by weather but definitely blood. Clara felt her stomach tighten. "My father's. No way to know for certain, but the timing fits, and look at this." Nathan indicated a shaft entrance that had been hastily shored up with lumber. "This mine entrance is new. Your father was not killed in an accident. He was killed here, probably while working his claim, and then his body was moved to make it look like he fell down an existing shaft somewhere else. Can we prove that? The blood helps, but we need more. We need to connect the colonel and his men to this site on the day your father died." Nathan straightened, his expression grim. "We also need to find out who has been working this claim since your father's death. If it is the Territorial Development Company, that is more evidence of their motive." A sound froze them both, horses approaching. Nathan immediately pulled Clara behind the rock outcropping, his hand on his rifle. 3 riders came into view, rough-looking men with the casual meanness of hired thugs. They rode straight to the mine entrance and dismounted. "Boss wants another load ready by Friday," one of them said, a man with a scar running down his left cheek. "Says the copper is running richer than they expected. We might be looking at double the original estimate." "That surveyor knew what he was talking about when he staked this claim," another replied. "Shame he had to have an accident before he could profit from it." The third man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Accidents happen in mining country, especially to people who do not understand the way business works around here." Clara felt rage boil up inside her at their casual dismissal of her father's murder. She started to move forward, but Nathan's hand clamped down on her arm, holding her back. He shook his head sharply, his expression warning her to stay silent. They waited in tense silence as the three men entered the mine shaft, their voices echoing as they discussed work quotas and shipping schedules. Nathan used the opportunity to carefully lead their horses further back into the canyon, out of sight. When the men emerged an hour later carrying samples of ore, Nathan and Clara remained hidden until the sound of hooves faded into the distance. "We need to follow them," Clara whispered urgently. "They all but confessed to being involved in my father's murder." "We need to be smart," Nathan corrected. "Following them directly could get us killed, but now we know this claim is actively being mined and those men work for someone. I recognized one of them. His name is Dutch Keller. He is known for hiring out his gun to whoever pays. If he is working this claim, we can use that information." "How?" "There is a land office in Prescott, about 30 miles north. All mining claims have to be registered there, along with transfer of ownership documents. If we can prove the Territorial Development Company took control of this claim under false pretenses, we have the beginning of a legal case. Combined with the evidence of your father's blood at the site and testimony about the threats he received, we might have enough to take to the territorial marshal." Clara felt frustrated at the slow pace of justice, but she recognized the wisdom in Nathan's approach. "How long will it take to get to Prescott?" "A day and a half if we ride hard, but we need to be careful. If the colonel suspects someone is investigating, he will move to cover his tracks, maybe permanently." Nathan met her eyes. "Are you sure you want to continue? This is your last chance to walk away safely." "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a warmth that had not been there before. "Then we ride for Prescott. But first, we head back to my cabin. We need supplies and we need a plan. This is not just about gathering evidence anymore. We are going up against dangerous men who have already killed. We need to be prepared for whatever comes." The ride back felt different. Clara and Nathan talked more, sharing stories of their pasts. She learned that Nathan had grown up in Missouri, the eldest of 4 children. His father had been a farmer who died when a plow horse kicked him in the head. Nathan, at 15, had taken responsibility for the family until his siblings were old enough to fend for themselves. He had worked various jobs: ranch hand, railroad worker, freight hauler before the betrayal that drove him into the mountains. In turn, Clara shared memories of her father, of growing up in a household where books were treasured and education prized above all else. How her father had taught her to read maps and use surveying equipment, treating her as an apprentice rather than just a daughter to be sheltered from the world. How he had encouraged her independence and intelligence, raising her to be strong and capable. "He sounds like a good man," Nathan said as they approached his cabin, "the kind of father any child would be lucky to have." "He was the best man I knew," Clara's voice caught. "That is why I cannot let his murder go unpunished. He deserves better than to be forgotten, his death swept aside as inconvenient. He will not be forgotten. I promise you that." The simple sincerity in Nathan's words affected Clara more than elaborate assurances would have. This man, this mountain recluse who owed her nothing, had committed himself to her cause. More than that, she realized she was beginning to trust him in a way she had not trusted anyone since her father's death. That evening, as they prepared for the journey to Prescott, Clara found herself acutely aware of Nathan's presence. The way he moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency. The way his hands, so capable and strong, handled everything from his rifle to the delicate task of repacking her father's surveying notes in waterproof oilcloth. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with a mixture of concern and something else she could not quite identify. "You have been kind to me," Clara said as they sat by the fire after dinner. "I want you to know I appreciate it. I know helping me disrupts the life you built here." Nathan stared into the flames. "Maybe I needed my life disrupted. Maybe I have been hiding long enough." "You were not hiding. You were healing." He looked at her sharply. "How do you know that?" "Because I recognize pain when I see it. Because someone who was truly broken would not have built this place, would not take care of their animals and garden with such attention, would not have those books on the shelf that show a mind still engaged with the world." Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. "You did not give up on life, Nathan. You just stepped away from the parts that hurt you. And now you are asking me to step back into those parts. I am asking you to help me create something good from something terrible, maybe that is different." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "My brother's name was Daniel. He was 23 when he died, engaged to be married, his whole life ahead of him. After the bridge collapsed, after everything fell apart, his fiancée came to see me. She asked why I had not done more to stop what happened, why I had not fought harder to make the railroad listen. I had no answer for her. I had followed the rules, gone through proper channels, done everything the way you were supposed to do it. And Daniel died anyway." Clara reached across the space between them and took Nathan's hand. His fingers tightened around hers, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "You cannot blame yourself for your brother's death. You did what you thought was right. And it was not enough. Just like I am sure your father tried to do the right thing, tried to stand up for his claim through legal means. It was not enough for him either. The system is designed to protect the powerful, not the powerless. Then we work outside the system if we have to, but we do not give up. That is what the powerful want for us to give up, to accept that we cannot fight them. But we can, we will." Clara squeezed his hand. "Together." Nathan met her eyes, and Clara saw the moment he truly committed, not just to helping her, but to trusting her. "Together," he agreed. They left for Prescott before dawn, riding through the cool morning air as the sky lightened from black to gray to pink. The journey would take them through varied terrain, mountain passes, pine forests, and eventually the high desert country surrounding the territorial capital. Nathan set a steady pace, stopping periodically to rest the horses and check their surroundings for potential threats. As they traveled, Clara found herself drawn more and more to Nathan's quiet strength. He was different from any man she had known. Where others might fill silence with meaningless chatter, Nathan seemed comfortable with quiet, speaking only when he had something worth saying. Yet when he did talk, his words carried weight and careful thought. He pointed out the names of plants and how they could be used for medicine or food. He showed her how to read the sky for weather signs. He shared the kind of practical knowledge that came from years of self-reliance. They made camp the first night in a sheltered canyon, building a small fire for warmth and cooking. As Clara helped prepare their meal, moving around Nathan in the small space, she became aware of a tension building between them. It was not uncomfortable, but rather the kind of awareness that comes when two people begin to see each other as more than just allies in a common cause. "Tell me about your life in Tucson," Nathan said as they ate. "What did you do there? What did you want for your future before all this happened?" Clara considered the question. "I worked as a teacher at a small school for girls. I enjoyed it, helping young minds discover their potential. But I always knew it was temporary. My father and I planned to pool our resources someday and open a cartography business together. He would do the surveying and field work, and I would handle the office, the clients, the business side of things. It was a good dream." Her voice grew soft. "I suppose it is just a dream now. Dreams do not die unless we let them. Maybe you will find a different partner for that business. Maybe you will discover a different dream entirely." Nathan paused. "You are a good teacher. I like to think so. Why?" Because teaching requires patience and the ability to see potential in others. Those are rare qualities, and I notice you have not once doubted your father's dream or your ability to be his partner. A lot of people, especially women, are taught to think small, to limit themselves. My father raised me to think for myself and set my own limits. He believed intelligence had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with opportunity and education. Clara smiled at the memory. I think you would have liked him. I think I would have too. They were quiet for a while, the fire crackling between them. Clara noticed how the firelight played across Nathan's features, softening the hard edges that came from years of outdoor living. She realized that beneath the beard and the weather-worn exterior was a handsome man, younger than she had initially thought. Perhaps only 30 or so. How old are you, Nathan? She asked impulsively. He looked surprised by the question. 31. Why? Just curious. You seem older sometimes, like you have lived several lifetimes. Some experiences age you faster than years. He studied her. How old are you? 24. Old enough to know what I want and young enough to still believe I can get it. Nathan smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. I like that description. It suits you. That night, Clara lay in her bedroll under the stars, listening to the sounds of the desert night. She could hear Nathan's steady breathing from where he lay on the other side of the dying fire, keeping watch even in sleep. For the first time since her father's death, Clara felt something other than grief and rage. She felt alive, aware of possibility, conscious of the future as something that might hold more than just revenge. They reached Prescott by late afternoon the following day. The territorial capital bustled with activity, a proper town with brick buildings, paved streets, and the apparatus of government. Nathan led them directly to a modest hotel where they could stable their horses and rent rooms. We need to be careful here, he told Clara as they entered the lobby. Prescott is not as controlled by the colonel as Jerome Junction, but he still has influence. We do our business quietly and quickly. They secured 2 rooms, and Clara felt a strange pang of disappointment at the separation. She had grown accustomed to Nathan's presence, to the security of knowing he was nearby. But propriety demanded separate accommodations, and she could not argue with that. After washing away the trail dust and changing into cleaner clothes, they met in the hotel dining room to discuss their approach. The land office closes at 5 o'clock, Nathan said, consulting a pocket watch. We have about an hour. I suggest we go there first, see what records we can access. If we encounter resistance, we might need to find another approach. The land office occupied a solid stone building near the territorial capital. Inside, a clerk with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers looked up from his work with practiced disinterest. "Can I help you?" he asked in a tone that suggested he hoped the answer was no. "We need to review the records for a mining claim in the Jerome Junction area," Clara said, stepping forward. The claim was originally filed by Thomas Grantham in November of last year, then transferred to the Territorial Development Company in March. The clerk's eyes sharpened with interest. "And what is your interest in this claim? Thomas Grantham was my father." "I am investigating the circumstances of the transfer. Transfer records are public information, but I will need to see identification and charge a small fee for the research time." Clara provided her documents and paid the fee. The clerk disappeared into a back room, returning 15 minutes later with a leather-bound ledger and several file folders. The claim was originally registered to Thomas Grantham on November 3, 1877, the clerk read. The notation indicates a prime location with promising copper deposits. On March 20th of this year, Ownership was transferred to the Territorial Development Company, registered out of Phoenix, with Colonel Harrison Devereaux listed as principal owner. The colonel finally had a full name. Clara committed it to memory. "What was the basis for the transfer?" Nathan asked, leaning forward to study the documents. "Settlement of debts. According to this affidavit, Mr. Grantham borrowed $1,500 from the Territorial Development Company against the value of his claim. When he died before repaying the loan, ownership automatically transferred to the company as per the loan agreement." "That is a lie," Clara said flatly. "My father would never have taken such a loan. He had his own capital. He wrote to me about his finances. There was no debt." The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "I just record what the documents say, miss. If you are disputing the validity of the transfer, you would need to file a formal challenge, which requires a lawyer and proof of your claims." "Can we get copies of these documents?" Nathan asked. "That will cost extra. Make the copies." While the clerk worked, Clara and Nathan stepped outside to talk privately. "This is more than just murder," Clara said, her anger barely contained. "They forged documents to steal his claim legally. Even if we prove he was murdered, they can claim they had legitimate ownership before his death." "Which makes our job harder but not impossible," Nathan replied. "We have evidence of fraud now. If we can prove your father never took that loan, never signed those papers, the entire transfer becomes invalid. Combined with evidence of his murder, we build a case that even corrupt officials will have trouble ignoring." "How do we prove he did not sign the papers?" "Your father's surveying notes. They are full of his handwriting. If we can get those documents examined by a handwriting expert, they might be able to confirm forgery. It is not perfect, but it is a start." They collected the copies, which cost Clara nearly all her remaining money, and returned to the hotel as evening fell. In the dining room over dinner, they spread out the documents and studied them carefully. "Look at this," Nathan said, pointing to the loan agreement. "It is dated February 10th. You said your father wrote to you about threats in early March. His last letter was dated March 15th. But he wrote earlier letters that mentioned pressure to sell. The first one was in late January. So the timeline has them creating this loan document while they were still trying to pressure him to sell voluntarily. Why create forged loan papers if they thought he might sell?" Clara understood what Nathan was suggesting. "Insurance. They created the loan papers as a backup plan. If they could not force him to sell, they would manufacture a legal claim to the property. Then, when that was not working fast enough, they murdered him." Which shows premeditation and planning. This was not a crime of passion or opportunity. This was calculated murder for financial gain. Nathan's expression was grim. "The question is how we get anyone in authority to care. What about the territorial marshal, the man the sheriff suggested would not help, Marshal Frank Donovan? I met him years ago before I came to the mountains. He was honest then, but that was a long time ago. People change, especially when pressure is applied." Nathan paused. "But he is our best option. If we can present him with enough evidence that he cannot ignore it without obviously being corrupt, he will have to act or risk his reputation." "When do we approach him?" "Tomorrow morning." "But tonight, we prepare. We need to organize everything we have, create a clear narrative of what happened and what evidence supports it. We get one chance at this. If we go to the marshal half prepared, we will get dismissed and the colonel will know we are investigating." They spent the evening working, laying out their case like assembling a puzzle. The blood at the claim site, the testimony from Margaret Walsh about the threats, the forged loan documents, the men working the claim who had joked about her father's death, Clara's own testimony about her father's character and financial situation. Nathan's observations about the staged accident. As the night grew late and the hotel grew quiet, Clara found herself studying Nathan across the table. He had removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms marked with scars from years of hard work. He wrote in a clear, careful hand, organizing their evidence with the methodical approach of someone who understood the importance of details. "You are good at this," Clara observed. "Building a case, organizing information, you should have been a lawyer." Nathan looked up with a wry smile. "I do not have the temperament for it. Too much talking, not enough doing." "I disagree. I think you would have been excellent at it. You just would have been the kind of lawyer who actually fought for justice instead of profit. The world has enough lawyers. It needs more people willing to stand up and fight when the lawyers fail." He set down his pen. "It is late. We should rest. Tomorrow could be difficult." Clara did not want to leave, did not want to break the companionable intimacy they had built over the evening. But Nathan was right. They both needed to be sharp for the morning meeting. She stood and gathered her things. At the door to her room, she turned back. Nathan still sat at the table, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for helping me, but for making me feel less alone in this." "You were never alone, Clara. You just did not know where to find your allies." He stood and crossed to her, stopping close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the scent of pine and leather that clung to his clothes. "Your father would be proud of you. I hope you know that." The words, so simple and sincere, broke through Clara's carefully maintained control. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and before she could stop herself, she stepped forward into Nathan's arms. He held her without hesitation, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. Clara cried against his chest, releasing weeks of held grief and fear and exhaustion. Nathan said nothing, just held her steady, providing the kind of silent support that meant more than any platitudes could have. When the storm of emotion finally passed, Clara pulled back slightly, embarrassed. "I am sorry. I did not mean to fall apart on you. Do not apologize. You have been holding up the world by yourself. Everyone needs to set down the weight sometimes." Nathan's hand came up to gently wipe tears from her cheek, his touch surprisingly tender. "You are stronger than anyone I have ever met, Clara Grantham. Do not ever doubt that." The moment stretched between them, charged with something beyond their shared mission. Clara looked up into Nathan's blue eyes and saw her own feelings reflected their attraction, respect, the beginning of something deeper. She swayed forward slightly, drawn by impulse and desire. Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat Clara thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back carefully, putting distance between them. "Get some rest," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I will knock on your door at 7 o'clock. We should reach the marshal's office by 8. Clara felt a confusing mixture of disappointment and relief. She nodded and slipped into her room, closing the door between them. Inside, she leaned against the wall and pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. What was she doing? Developing feelings for a man she had known less than a week. A man who was helping her investigate her father's murder. Yet even as she questioned herself, Clara knew the truth. What she felt for Nathan was not some fleeting attraction born of proximity and shared danger. It was deeper than that, rooted in recognition. She saw in him the same qualities she had admired in her father: integrity, strength, the willingness to fight for what was right even when it cost him dearly. Nathan Jennings was a good man in a world that seemed determined to punish goodness. And Clara, despite everything, was falling in love with him. The morning came too quickly. Clara dressed in her most respectable clothes, a dark blue traveling dress that had survived the journey relatively intact. She braided her hair into a neat coronet and studied herself in the mirror. She looked older than her years, aged by grief and determination. But her eyes were clear and her jaw set. She would do this. She would get justice for her father. Nathan knocked precisely at 7, dressed in clean clothes he must have purchased the previous day. He had trimmed his beard and tied his hair back, looking more civilized than Clara had yet seen him. The transformation was striking. He looked like what he had been before exile drove him to the mountains, a competent, educated man who could navigate society when necessary. "You look nice," Clara said, then immediately felt foolish for the observation, but Nathan smiled. "So do you." Ready, they ate a quick breakfast and set out for the marshal's office. Prescott was already busy, people going about their morning routines, unaware that Clara and Nathan were about to attempt something that could shake the foundations of power in the territory. Marshal Frank Donovan proved to be a lean man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that took in everything. His office was neat and organized, wanted posters on one wall and territorial maps on another. He looked up as they entered, his expression professional and slightly wary. "Can I help you?" Nathan stepped forward. "Marshal Donovan, I do not know if you remember me, Nathan Jennings. We met about 8 years ago in Denver. You were investigating a stagecoach robbery." Recognition flickered across the marshal's face. "Jennings, I heard you had disappeared into the mountains. What brings you back to civilization?" "This is Clara Grantham. Her father was murdered in Jerome Junction 2 months ago. The local sheriff has refused to investigate because the men responsible have money and influence. We have evidence we would like to present to you." The marshal's expression grew guarded. "That is a serious accusation. What evidence?" For the next hour, Nathan and Clara laid out everything they had discovered. They showed him the copied documents, explained the forged loan agreement, described the blood at the claim site and the men openly joking about the convenient accident. Clara provided her father's letters and his surveying notes, explaining his character and financial situation. Nathan offered his professional opinion as someone who had worked in railroad investigations, drawing parallels to the kind of fraud and corruption he had seen before. Marshal Donovan listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and studied them both carefully. "This is complicated," he said finally. "You are accusing Colonel Devereaux, one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the territory, of murder and fraud. Do you understand what that means?" "It means you have a choice," Clara said firmly. "You can do your job and investigate these allegations, or you can protect the powerful at the expense of justice. I understand that is not an easy choice, Marshal, but it is the choice that defines what kind of man you are." The marshal's eyes narrowed, but there was a hint of respect in his expression. "You have your father's courage, I see." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "I have been a lawman for 30 years. I have seen corruption at every level, watched good people destroyed by those with money and influence. I have also learned that sometimes the only way to fight the powerful is to be smarter than they are. You have brought me compelling evidence, but it is not enough for a prosecution. Not yet." "What more do you need?" Nathan asked. "I need the original loan documents examined by an expert. I need testimony from those miners you saw at the claim site. I need Margaret Walsh to formally state what she knows about the threats against Thomas Grantham. And most importantly, I need proof that Colonel Devereaux personally ordered or participated in the fraud and murder. What you have given me is a blueprint. Now we need to fill it in with irrefutable facts." "Can you help us do that?" Clara asked. The marshal turned from the window. "I can and I will, but we must be careful. If Devereaux suspects an official investigation, he will destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. We need to move quietly and quickly. I can send a deputy to Jerome Junction to secure the original documents from the land office and bring Mrs. Walsh here to give a formal statement. I can also have an expert examine the handwriting, but getting those minors to testify will be your job. They work for Devereaux. They will not talk to me. How do we get them to talk? Clara asked. You find leverage. Maybe one of them has a criminal record and fears being connected to a murder. Maybe one of them has a family and can be convinced that testifying will keep him safe from prosecution. Everyone has pressure points. You find them and you use them. The marshal's expression was hard but not unkind. This is not pretty work, Miss Grantham. This is the reality of bringing powerful men to justice. Are you prepared for that? Clara met his gaze steadily. I am prepared to do whatever is necessary within the bounds of the law. Good. Then here is what we do. They spent the rest of the morning planning. Marshal Donovan would use his authority to gather the documentary evidence and expert testimony. Nathan and Clara would return to Jerome Junction and work on identifying and approaching potential witnesses among the men working the claim. The marshal would give them 2 weeks to build their case before deciding whether to move forward with formal charges. 2 weeks, Clara said as they left the marshal's office. That is not much time. It is more than we had this morning, Nathan replied. Donovan is taking a risk by helping us. He could have dismissed us entirely. The fact that he is willing to pursue this investigation says something about his character. They spent the rest of the day purchasing supplies for their return to Jerome Junction and preparing for the difficult work ahead. That evening, as they ate dinner in the hotel, Clara found herself studying Nathan across the table. What happens when this is over? She asked quietly. After we bring them to justice, after the trial, after everything is resolved, what then? Nathan looked up from his meal, surprised by the question. I have not thought that far ahead. Why? Because I have been thinking about it, thinking about what I want from my life, what kind of future makes sense. I realized I do not want to go back to Tucson. I do not want to return to teaching at that small school, living the life I had before. Everything has changed. What do you want? Nathan's voice was careful, but his eyes were intent on her face. I want to honor my father's memory by building the business we dreamed of. I want to create something good and lasting from this tragedy, but I do not want to do it alone. Clara took a breath, gathering her courage. Nathan, I know this might seem sudden. I know we have only known each other a short time, but what I feel for you is real. You have shown me what integrity looks like, what it means to fight for justice even when it costs you. You have stood by me when you had every reason to turn me away. I cannot imagine facing the future without you in it. Nathan set down his fork, his expression conflicted. Clara, you have been through tremendous loss and stress. Your emotions are heightened by everything you have experienced. I do not want you to make decisions you might regret when you are thinking more clearly. Do not patronize me, Clara said, her voice sharp. I am perfectly capable of understanding my own feelings. I am not some fragile woman overcome by circumstance. I am asking you, directly and honestly, if you feel anything for me beyond obligation or pity. The directness of the question seemed to catch Nathan off guard. He was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something internal. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. I feel everything for you. From the moment you rode up to my cabin with that determined look on your face, I have been lost. You are beautiful and courageous and so full of fire that being near you makes me feel alive for the first time in years. I think about you constantly. I lie awake at night listening to you breathe and feel grateful for your presence. I am terrified of what might happen to you because of this investigation, and I am terrified of what will happen to me when you inevitably realize you deserve better than a failed railroad foreman living in exile." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Clara stood and moved around the table, holding out her hand to Nathan. "Walk with me." He took her hand and let her lead him from the dining room, through the hotel lobby, and out into the warm evening air. Prescott's streets were quieter now, businesses closing for the night, the sky above streaked with purple and orange as the sun set behind the mountains. They walked in silence to a small park at the edge of town, where trees provided privacy, and the sounds of the town faded to background noise. Clara turned to face Nathan, keeping hold of his hand. "You are not a failure," she said firmly. "You are a good man who tried to do the right thing and got punished for it. That is not failure. That is the world being broken. And you do not live in exile. You live in those mountains because you choose to, because you built a life there that brings you peace. There is no shame in that. Clara, let me finish. You say I deserve better, but what could be better than a man who keeps his word? A man who risks his safety to help a stranger seek justice. A man who sees me as an equal partner rather than something to be protected and controlled." She raised her free hand to his face, feeling the roughness of his beard beneath her palm. "I do not want some polished gentleman who says pretty words but lacks substance. I want you, Nathan Jennings. Exactly as you are." Nathan's control finally broke. He pulled Clara against him and kissed her with a desperation that spoke of weeks of denied desire. Clara responded with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck as she pressed herself closer. The kiss was nothing like the tentative first kisses of her past. This was claiming and being claimed, recognition and acceptance, the beginning of something inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I have nothing to offer you," he said quietly. "A cabin in the mountains and a life outside of society, that is not what you deserve. You have everything to offer me: partnership, respect, love. That is more than most women ever find." Clara pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "I am not asking you to be something you are not. I am saying I want to build a future with you, whatever that looks like. Maybe we establish my father's business. Maybe we live in the mountains. Maybe we find some compromise between civilization and solitude, but we figure it out together. You would really want that, a life with me? I have never wanted anything more." Nathan kissed her again, slower this time, tender rather than desperate. Clara felt something shift inside her, grief making space for joy, loss making space for new beginnings. They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, and this time when they reached Clara's door, Nathan did not immediately retreat. They stood close together in the hallway, reluctant to separate. "Tomorrow we ride back to Jerome Junction," Nathan said. "Things might get dangerous from here. These men will not want to be exposed. I know, we will be careful." Clara squeezed his hand. "But whatever happens, we face it together now." "Together," Nathan agreed. He kissed her forehead gently. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow starts our real work." The ride back to Jerome Junction took 2 full days. They traveled at a more leisurely pace, taking time to discuss strategy and enjoy each other's company. Everything felt different now that they had acknowledged their feelings. Nathan was more open, sharing stories from his past and dreams for the future he had thought lost to him. Clara felt lighter despite the serious work ahead, buoyed by the knowledge that whatever came, she would not face it alone. They made camp the second night near the old Spanish mission ruins that marked the path to Nathan's cabin. After dinner, they sat close together by the fire, Clara leaning against Nathan's shoulder. "Tell me about the business your father wanted to build," Nathan said. "The cartography company. What would that have looked like?" Clara described her father's vision: a service for prospectors, railroad companies, and territorial surveyors who needed accurate maps and geological assessments. The demand was high, and her father's skills had been exceptional. With proper management and marketing, it could have been quite profitable. "It is still possible," Nathan said thoughtfully. "You have your father's notes and maps. You understand the business side. What you need is someone to do the field work and surveying. I may not have your father's training, but I know these mountains. I can read terrain and mineral deposits from years of living off the land. With some study of his techniques, I could handle the surveying work." Clara sat up, excitement building. "Are you serious? You would want to do that?" "I have been thinking about what comes after we finish this investigation. I cannot go back to living alone in those mountains, not now. But I also cannot return to the life I left behind. This would be something new. We would be building something together, honoring your father's memory while creating our own future." "Where would we base the business? Prescott? Tucson?" "Prescott makes sense. Central location, territorial capital, close to the mountains but still connected to civilization. We could find a small property, build an office, maybe a house nearby." Nathan paused. "I am getting ahead of myself. First, we need to survive the next few weeks and bring your father's killers to justice." "No, do not stop. I want to hear all of it. I want to imagine the future we are fighting for." Clara took his hand. "Tell me what you see." So Nathan did. He painted a picture of a life built around partnership and shared purpose. The business operating from a storefront office in Prescott, with Clara managing the contracts and finances while Nathan handled the fieldwork. A small house on the edge of town where the mountains were visible from the windows. Eventually, maybe children, a family built on love and mutual respect rather than obligation. It was the most Nathan had spoken about his dreams since Clara had met him, and she treasured every word. This man who had retreated from the world was opening himself to possibility again, and she knew that was precious and rare. "It sounds perfect," Clara said softly. "Every bit of it. We will make it happen. I promise you that." Nathan's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Now we should sleep. Tomorrow we enter dangerous territory." They returned to Nathan's cabin the following morning and spent the afternoon preparing. The plan was to watch the claim site, identify the men working there, and research their backgrounds to find potential leverage. It would require patience and careful observation, but Marshal Donovan had been clear they needed someone willing to testify against Colonel Devereaux directly. For 3 days, Nathan and Clara took turns watching the claim from concealed positions in the surrounding rocks. They identified 5 men who worked the site regularly, including Dutch Keller and the 2 who had joked about Thomas Grantham's death. Nathan made notes on their routines, their interactions, looking for weaknesses. On the 4th day, opportunity presented itself. One of the younger miners, a man in his early 20s with sandy hair and nervous mannerisms, got into an argument with Dutch Keller about payment. The argument grew heated, with Keller threatening the younger man and eventually striking him across the face. The young miner left the site early, riding toward Jerome Junction alone. "That is our opening," Nathan said. "A man angry at his employer is more likely to talk. We follow him, see where he goes, then approach him carefully." They tracked the young miner to a small shack on the outskirts of Jerome Junction. Nathan suggested they wait until evening to approach, when the man would have had time to calm down but still be angry enough to consider talking. As darkness fell, they knocked on the door. The young miner answered with a suspicious expression that turned to alarm when he saw strangers. "Who are you? What do you want?" "My name is Clara Grantham. I would like to talk to you about Thomas Grantham." Recognition and fear flickered across the young man's face. I do not know what you are talking about. We saw what happened today, Nathan said calmly. We saw Dutch Keller hit you. We know you work the claim that used to belong to Miss Grantham's father. We are not here to threaten you. We are here to offer you a way out. The young miner looked around nervously, then gestured them inside. His shack was sparsely furnished, showing the poverty of someone barely scraping by despite working for a wealthy man. My name is Billy Carson, he said. What do you want from me? The truth, Clara said. Tell us what happened to my father. Tell us what you know about how he died and who gave the orders. In exchange, Marshal Donovan in Prescott has agreed that anyone who cooperates with the investigation will face no charges. Billy sank onto a rickety chair, his hands shaking. If I talk, they will kill me. Dutch and the others, they are dangerous men. The colonel does not forgive betrayal. The colonel is going down, Nathan said with quiet certainty. The only question is whether you go down with him or whether you save yourself. We have evidence. We have other witnesses. We are building a case that will destroy the Territorial Development Company and everyone involved. Your choice is whether you are one of the guilty or one of the witnesses. How can I trust you? Clara knelt in front of Billy so they were at eye level. Because I am not interested in punishing men like you. I want the people who ordered my father's death. I want Colonel Devereaux and his partners. You were just trying to make a living. I understand that. But I cannot let my father's murder go unpunished. Help us, and you walk away free. Stay silent, and you are complicit. Billy looked between them, clearly torn. Finally, he took a shaking breath. It was supposed to be a warning. That is what Dutch told us. We were supposed to rough up your father, scare him into selling, but it went wrong. Your father fought back, and Dutch, he hit him too hard. Your father went down and did not get back up. Dutch panicked. He sent me and another man back to report while he staged the accident scene. Then the colonel, he had his lawyers create the loan paperwork to make it look like there was a legal claim to the property. We thought it was over. Bile rose in Clara's throat, but she kept her voice steady. Who else was involved? Who gave the order to threaten my father? A man named Wade Sullivan. He works directly for the colonel, handles the dirty business. He told Dutch to make sure your father understood he needed to sell or face consequences. But the colonel, he knew what was happening. Sullivan would not have done anything without the colonel's approval. Will you testify to this? Nathan asked. If you can guarantee my safety, if you can promise the colonel will not get to me before the trial. Marshal Donovan can put you in protective custody. You would be safe until you testify. Billy nodded slowly. Then I will do it. I never signed up for murder. I just needed work. Your father, Miss Grantham, he seemed like a decent man. I am sorry for what happened. The apology, coming from someone who had been there when her father died, affected Clara deeply. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. Thank you for doing the right thing now. That matters. They arranged for Billy to travel to Prescott the next day and turn himself in to Marshal Donovan for protection. As Clara and Nathan rode back toward Nathan's cabin in the darkness, Clara felt the first real hope since beginning this quest. We are going to win, she said. We are actually going to bring them to justice. Billy's testimony is strong, but we still need to connect everything directly to Colonel Devereaux. Sullivan is the link. If we can get him to turn on the colonel, this case becomes unbeatable. How do we do that? We give him the same choice we gave Billy. Cooperate or go down with the ship. But Sullivan is more dangerous. He is not some scared kid trying to earn money. He is a true criminal. Approaching him will be risky. They decided to wait a few days while Billy made his way to Prescott and gave his statement to the marshal. If that went well, Marshal Donovan could use Billy's testimony to pressure Sullivan. They were building a chain of evidence that grew stronger with each link. During those waiting days, Clara and Nathan allowed themselves to simply be together. They rode through the mountains, with Nathan teaching Clara to read the landscape the way he did. They talked about everything and nothing, building the foundation of a shared life. At night, they sat by the fire and planned their business, sketching ideas and discussing possibilities, and they grew closer in ways both physical and emotional. Kisses became more frequent and more passionate. Nathan was always respectful, never pushing Clara beyond what she was comfortable with, but the desire between them was undeniable. Clara found herself impatient with propriety, wanting to fully claim the future they were building together. One week after their conversation with Billy Carson, a rider arrived at Nathan's cabin carrying a message from Marshal Donovan. The marshal had used Billy's testimony to secure a warrant for Wade Sullivan's arrest. Sullivan had been taken into custody in Phoenix, and facing the possibility of hanging for murder, had agreed to testify against Colonel Devereaux in exchange for a reduced sentence. The marshal was building his case for formal charges and wanted Nathan and Clara to come to Prescott to finalize their statements. "It is really happening," Clara said, staring at the letter. "We are going to see them face justice." The trial took place in late August, nearly 6 months after Thomas Grantham's death. The courthouse in Prescott filled with spectators drawn by the scandal of a prominent man facing murder and fraud charges. Clara sat in the front row, Nathan beside her, their hands clasped tightly together. The prosecution presented a devastating case. Billy Carson testified about the assault that killed Thomas Grantham and how Dutch Keller had staged the accident. Wade Sullivan, looking haggard and broken, described how Colonel Devereaux had ordered him to pressure Grantham into selling and to do whatever was necessary to secure the claim. The handwriting expert confirmed that the signature on the loan documents was forged. Margaret Walsh testified about the threats Thomas Grantham had described to her. And Clara herself took the stand to describe her father's character and financial situation, reading from his letters that showed his state of mind before his death. The defense tried to paint Thomas Grantham as a drunk and a poor businessman who had gotten in over his head. They portrayed the colonel as a respectable businessman unaware of his subordinates' criminal actions. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury saw through the lies. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on all counts. Colonel Harrison Devereaux was sentenced to hang for murder. Wade Sullivan received life in prison for his role. Dutch Keller, who had fled when the arrests began, was wanted with a substantial bounty on his head. Clara felt no joy in the verdict, only a deep sense of satisfaction that justice had been served. As they left the courthouse, Nathan's arm around her shoulders, she felt as if a great weight had lifted from her chest. Her father had been avenged, the truth had been exposed, the powerful had been held accountable. "It is over," she said quietly. "No," Nathan replied, kissing the top of her head. "It is just beginning." They were married 1 month later in a small ceremony in Prescott, with Marshal Donovan and his wife serving as witnesses. Clara wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, and Nathan wore new clothes that transformed him into the respectable businessman he had once been. But Clara knew the truth. Nathan would never be entirely civilized, and she loved him all the more for it. They used the money from the sale of Thomas Grantham's claim, which was legally returned to Clara after the trial, to purchase a storefront office in Prescott and a small house with mountain views. Grantham and Jennings Cartography opened for business in September of 1878, and within months, they had more work than they could handle. Nathan proved to be a natural surveyor once he studied Thomas Grantham's notes and techniques. His intimate knowledge of the mountains combined with technical training made him one of the most sought-after mapmakers in the territory. Clara managed the business with skill and efficiency, her father's lessons serving her well. Their first child, a son they named Thomas Daniel, was born in the summer of 1879. He had Clara's green eyes and Nathan's dark hair, and he was doted on by his parents with equal devotion. 2 years later, a daughter named Margaret followed, named for the woman who had helped them at the beginning of their journey. As their family grew, so did their business. They hired assistants and apprentices, teaching young surveyors the craft and building a reputation for honesty and quality work. Nathan never forgot where he came from, and he made a point of hiring men who had fallen on hard times or been cast out by society, giving them second chances the way Clara had given him. On warm summer evenings, the family would sit on the porch of their home, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Nathan would hold Clara close while the children played in the yard, and they would talk about how far they had come from that day when a grieving daughter rode up to a mountain cabin seeking justice. "You ever regret it?" Clara asked one such evening, years into their marriage. Leaving the mountains, coming back to civilization, Nathan considered the question seriously, as he considered everything. "I regret nothing that brought me to you. The mountains gave me peace when I needed it, but you gave me purpose. You reminded me that fighting for what is right matters, even when it is hard, even when it costs us. We built something good from something terrible. I think my father would be proud. I know he would. We honored his memory not just by seeking justice, but by living lives of integrity and meaning. That is the best legacy anyone can leave." Clara leaned into her husband's embrace, watching their children laugh and play. The scars of grief would always be part of her, but they had healed into something stronger. She had come to Jerome Junction seeking justice for wrongs done to her father. Nathan Jennings, the mountain man who had retreated from the world, had given her not only justice but also love, partnership, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new opportunities to build the life they had created together. But tonight, Clara was content to sit with her family and feel grateful for the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The mountain man had given her justice and love, and in return, she had given him a reason to believe in both again. Together, they had created something precious and enduring, a testament to the truth that even in a world that often seemed dark and unjust, love and courage could still triumph. And that, Clara thought as Nathan's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, was the happiest ending she could have asked for.